Okay, super. All right. Okay, folks, I guess we're starting a little bit earlier, but this is good. Gives us a little bit of extra time. So actually, David should be here as well, I think. David Quigg from the Sierra Club BC.
Hi, Julius.
Hey,
Can you hear me? Yeah.
good to hear you.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so we're gonna just kind of be and David's gonna be as time, as opportunities present, he's also going to be sharing information as well. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to run how to draw a humpback whale, and I'll share my screen in a moment. And then we'll also discuss the beautiful aspects of their biology and conservation, why and how we need to protect them and so on. What I'd like to start with, though, is right now I'm in Edmonton for the time being. And so I'd like to just do an acknowledgement of the First Nations on whose land I'm living at this time. I'd like to acknowledge the land here as traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Cree, the Dene, the Stoney, the Saulteaux, and the Blackfoot First Nations. And so I'm very grateful to be able to be here. And I am hoping to be able to learn so much more about the wonderful, rich cultures of all these people. And I'd love to do whatever we can to encourage them to thrive further, so that we stop, our usual sort of just colonial ways and just celebrate the cultures that were here already thousands of years before we were. So with that, David, would you like to say any words?
Well, thanks, Julius. I don't know much about humpback whales, so I'm here for a little bit of side banter. But you take it away. You lead the show. I'm so excited that you're able to do this with us.
Me too. Me too. This is really wonderful for me. So I have now shared my screen. Can you see that? Can you see the whale? I've got it running in Photoshop at the moment. Should be visible here. Let me know if you don't see that. Okay. So I'm going to assume that it's visible now. Um, Hopefully everything is okay. Hang on.
Yeah, it's great.
But good, good. I kind of froze there for a second in my video, so I think it's maybe just catching up. Hopefully the bandwidth will be okay here for the whole system. And let me know if there's any problems along the way. This is the being that we're going to be learning how to draw today. This is a preview of what we're actually after. So I'm just going to start up my little timer here so I know how much we got going. So humpback whales. These are a wonderful being that lives in our oceans, mostly coastal, but they're incredibly migratory. They move from place to place over 8,000 kilometers every year in one direction. They're like the monarchs of the sea in some ways. They even have those like wing-like flippers. So they're spectacular, beautiful animals, inspiring to no end. As I draw this, I'm going to be talking about their biology and conservation. And then if you, David, if you have anything else to add in there, please do feel free to jump in. And this, I'm going to turn off this particular preview and we'll get going on the actual drawing itself. I've set it up right now on my screen as an 8.5 by 11 sort of aspect ratio. So if you want to use a page, regular letter size page, it'll work. Just pay attention to where on the page I'm setting up the drawings. And one other thing to pay attention to is I've got two colors that I'm going to be drawing in, red and black. The red will mean draw it very lightly so that those lines we don't want to keep there really. The black is the permanent line. So that sort of gives you a little idea of what I'm intending there. Okay. So with that, let's actually get going with this. So I'm going to turn off the preview here. I might be kind of looking off to the side in your screens there because my tablet is actually on in front of me below, but and my camera happens to be up there. So if that's why this is happening. So the first thing we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we're going to do two kinds of weights of line. The first one here is a light colored line. We're going to set up where the animal fits on the screen here. Okay, so I'd like you to make a light, a very fine line that goes part of the way through the page. Whoops, sorry, not like that. Like this. Hang on, it's a bit slow. Okay, like this. Again, just kind of like it's an arc, like a big, kind of a big U shape, wide U shape. Should be kind of smooth. I made it a little bit roughish. This is gonna be kind of like sets out where the belly of the animal is. The next thing that I'm going to add to that is another one that will kind of show where the back of the animal is. Starting from the top right corner, and we're going to go down a bit like this, and go and don't quite meet the other line, and about there with a little bit of a gap. So these are huge, beautiful animals. They range in size roughly from like the biggest school buses or metro buses up to about a railroad boxcar in size, in length. They're huge, beautiful. And I can't even imagine what it must be like to see them underwater or from a boat, having them come to meet us, because sometimes they're very curious. I would love to experience that. I've only seen that with a young orca, and that was magical enough. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to put in place where that gigantic flippers are. They have these beautiful, huge wing-like flippers. And so this will kind of mark it. And so we're going to do this. I'm going to just call it a flipper shape, because really I don't know what else this is going to be like. I mean, it's a little bit like a banana, but not really. It's a flipper shape. And we see this in other animals as well. So these are kind of the light lines. Now we're going to start to add the heavier ones. The reason I wanted to set this up is so that we get proportions more or less right, because it's really hard to set up proportions in art if you go like a little bit at a time. You got to set up these bigger shapes at first, and that's really helpful usually. Okay, so we're going to start with the back of the animal. Now I'm going to shift to black here, which means the more solid lines. And for that, here we go, like this. Just add one more thing here. Okay. It's funny, the system works a wee bit slower when in combination with the online sort of thing, but it's working just fine. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add the back of the animal in a little bit more detail. That line along the back that we set up is pretty good. So we're going to start drawing along it from the tip where the snout is on the upper right, and then come down, pretty much follow that line. Only difference is at the very end of it, right about where we are right here, I'm going to add a few very slight bumps. Because humpback whales have this interesting sort of like bumpy bit, slightly bumpy bit along the upper part of what's called the caudal peduncle, or the kind of the base of the tail. Kind of interesting patterns there. Okay, so we've got that going. And we're also going to add a dorsal fin. So dorsal fin is the one on top. On baleen whales, or big whales that filter water to eat plankton, they have small dorsal fins compared to larger dorsal fins of like porpoises and dolphins. The humpback whales have an interesting shaped dorsal fin. It's got a little bit of a front hump and then a bit of a hook. So it's got this kind of little bit of a complex shape to it. Now, I always thought that that's why they got their name humpback whale, because the dorsal fin is kind of, it has this additional hump on it. But allegedly, it actually comes from how their back looks when they're diving. And so I produced a bit of a little a diagram above to show you what they look like when they're diving. They arch their back sharply. And so it looks like a very humped back when they're diving. You see that dorsal fin on top. I've seen them off the coast of BC, off the coast of Vancouver, actually, in English Bay. There's a pair of them feeding. And I tell you, that was magical to see in person from shore, to see humpback whales. That was amazing. And the fact that we can see them at all is amazing now. Because at one time, at the point at which their numbers were lowest, just before they were all hunting was outlawed in 1966, their numbers had dwindled to about 5,000 worldwide, which is, like, if you think about it, it's half the size of the minimum size of a city in some places. It's ridiculous. This animal we chose, David and I were chatting about this beginning when we were planning this whole endeavor to choose an animal that's a great example of one that gives hope because this is what this conference is about, right? Empowering hope. We need to see wonderful stories of success in conservation as well, and this is a great example of it. Humpback whales now number, get this, about 135,000 worldwide. That is a gargantuan increase. They are very close to their historical population sizes before whaling. So what this tells us is that when we put our efforts, our minds together and put effort into it, we most certainly can make a difference. We can save individual species of beings. And if we put enough effort into it, we most certainly can and will have to save the biosphere. So that's kind of like the nutshell of why we are looking and drawing a humpback whale at all today here. Also because they're just so cool. So we've got this this dorsal fin of the animal now. Now I'm gonna put the belly in. We got this. The humpback whales are in the group of whales called rorquals. These are those large baleen whales. They have these plates in their mouth through which they filter seawater. And among the rorquals, humpback whales are really quite squat and round. When you look at them from above, they have this really round boat-like shape, and they have these big bellies compared to the beautiful, long, sleek shape of like blue whales and fin whales. So they're interesting that way. So we're going to put the belly of the whale in, and for that, I'm going to actually start from the tail, and start drawing like this. Is a little bit of a curve here, and we're going to add the belly in, and it curves very much following that red line we made. But I'm going to stop at the flipper because I'm not going to draw through the flipper. That's why I kind of set that up ahead of time. And then we continue going forward, and we go almost to the front, but we're going to stop before we reach the front. We're going to stop about here. You don't have to draw the arrow in, roughly around there. Just going to stop there, and you'll see why, because that's not actually the full shape of the front end. Okay, so here we go. So this is most of the belly. Big, really bulky whales. So they even look bigger underwater than their length would suggest. They're just really space-filling. Beautiful. Now, here's why we kind of ended a little bit earlier. We're going to put the snout of the animal in. So humpback whales have this really bulky belly, but then they have this long, narrow snout. So they kind of look interesting the way that they curve. They have these inflection points. In fact, you can even stop a little bit behind where we did, but I'm going to pull that arrow out because it's kind of going to get in the way. But we're going to draw the snout forward of where this sort of this lemon-like shape was. I'm starting at the top, at the corner. Go forward a little bit. This will be the upper jaw. And notice I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. And then I go to the lower jaw. There's a little bit of a lip here. And a kind of an angular chin. They have the strangest shaped front end. And if you look at them actually from the front, they look even more interesting. It looks for all the world like you're looking at the bow of a boat when you look at them from the front. They're pretty amazing shape that way. And actually, that's sort of similar for other baleen whales as well. They look so boat-like. If you've ever seen a blue whale as well from the front, I encourage you to look at photos. Really, really neat and unexpected in some ways. So now there's one feature of humpback whales that is unique compared to all other of these baleen whales. They have these features called tubercles. They look like warts. They are bumps all over the head, the snout of the animal, and then also along the front end of the flippers. We're going to draw them first on the snout here. And it's not fully understood why they're there. They each have maybe one or two hairs coming out of them. Remember, whales are mammals, right? So they actually have hair, especially in the womb, but these ones actually produce thick hairs coming out of them as well. But they are also thought to maybe have a sensory function. They're hollow and they're heavily innervated. They have a lot of nerves passing to them. So for some, they're there for some reason. And so what we're going to do is we'll add these little bumps along the snout, kind of like this, here and there. It's a few bumps, and then along the top end of the snout as well, and then along sort of the jaw, little circly shapes. And then at the tip of the chin here, there's a couple of bigger bumps like that. Okay, so the chin, it looks kind of bumpy like that. Okay, so it'll make sense in a second about where everything is. We're going to add the mouth next, and I actually probably should have done it in the other order, but that's fine too. So the mouth actually will show us how that will finally complete the overall shape of the head. We left the mouth a little bit of a gap in this now because I want the mouth to be slightly open so we can see the baleen plates. The mouth of these animals is really amazing, actually. It's really, really long. So I'm going to start from the tip of the upper jaw and go way backward toward the flipper. And then it does this massive curve downward like this and ends just in front of the flipper. Huge long mouth, huge heads. I mean, if you've ever seen the skull of a whale, it's enormous, unmistakable. And then the lower jaw, we're going to add a little bit of it, the left side of it there, and then the right side, the margin of the lip, basically, coming back. And you can see the mouth is just slightly open and merging with the upper jaw back there. And so I've left, again, a little gap between the left side, the left margin of the lower jaw and the upper jaw. And that's because we're going to put the baleen in there as well to show it off. First of all, I'm going to add the eye. So these enormous jaws of the whales. If you look at a whale, by the way, what does it look like? It's hard to remind you of anything that's alive otherwise, right? In some ways, other than a fish, which of course it's not closely related to. In fact, they are mammals, as we talked about, but more specifically, they are in the group called artiodactyls, which are hoofed mammals. This is the weirdest thing. You wouldn't think of a hoofed mammal when you see a whale, but their closest living relatives on land are, like, for example, hippopotamus. So, I mean, you can sort of see the huge mouth of the hippopotamus, kind of like a whale, but that's kind of their closest living relatives. This is the strangest difference. Wonderful example of how they evolved so vastly differently to fill a completely different environment. So the eye of the humpback whale is this lemony-shaped little thing here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, actually. You can see it better. Near the base of the mouth, actually just above it. And it's below the level of most of the mouth ahead of it. It's another strange thing about whales, where their eyes are placed. It's really odd in many ways. They're not enormously visual animals. In the open ocean, you can only just see so far, right? And so you need eyes to protect yourself from predators, but most of the way that they communicate with each other is with sound. And so they're wonderful singers. And if you've ever heard the sound of a humpback whale, the males sing absolutely extraordinary songs that last anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour, and they can be heard many kilometers away. It's thought that maybe their singing helps to bring whales together. And recent studies showed that the number or the frequency of songs or the abundance of songs reduced since the numbers of whales globally has increased. So it seems like the more whales there are, it's easier to find each other. They might actually be singing a little bit less. There's also some ideas about songs being used during the breeding season to attract mates. And so you have these beautiful songs that have different themes that change gradually over time, depending on the population and how long it is. It's really spectacular. If you'd like to, you frequently see recordings or live recordings from hydrophones being played of humpback whale songs. And one of the best people I know that posts these, say on Facebook, is the Marine Detective. If you follow the Marine Detective, it's Jackie Hildering. She posts these beautiful hydrophone live songs of humpback whales, and it's beautiful to hear that just off the coast of BC. So I'm going to add the baleen now. We got the eye in place. The baleen is a series of these plates that hang from the upper jaw only. They don't have teeth. Whales' ancestors did have teeth, but modern baleen whales don't have teeth. They have these secondarily evolved plates of hard material called baleen that hang from the upper jaw, and they overlap each other like tiles on a roof, but even closer. And in the end, what you have is this, I'm going to draw it in here, hanging from the upper jaw, and then just what you see is looks like a comb. Many, many, many lines, parallel lines. And these are all the leading edges of baleen plates overlapping on each other. And they form this really tight assemblage of beautifully filtering materials. And so water can pass through this pretty easily, but small objects like plankton, krill, and small fish, they get stuck in there, right? And so then the whale is able to swallow those and allow the water to pass out. It's a beautiful filtering mechanism. It's like the ultimate cheesecloth. And so that's their baleen. This one is actually just opening its mouth to take in some water. And what do they eat? mostly small, all kinds of small organisms. Like, for example, here I'm going to zoom out a bit. This is an example of a species of krill. Krill are very, actually, let's zoom out a bit. It's a form of crustacean related to lobsters and crabs and crayfish. They look a little bit like crayfish, but they're small, about length of your finger maybe. And they can be in the millions or more. And so baleen whales would come and gulp down a bunch of water and press out the water and eat the krill, or small fish, all kinds of different small animals. And so that's an example of one of the animals they eat. This is not the scale, by the way. Obviously, the krill here is much, much larger than at the same scale as the whale. Just an example of roughly what they look like. Now, in addition, we're going to also add a bump at the top of the head for the whale where the blowhole sits. And the blowhole is, of course, the highly modified nostrils of the whale. That's the only way in which they breathe. They don't breathe through the mouth. They breathe through their blowhole, which is on the top of their head and just in front of the eyes. So I'm going to add that here by showing this low bump on top of the head, like that. Baleen whales have two blowholes side by side, and you can only barely see one from the side here, in the side view. If you looked from above, it would look sort of like this. You don't have to draw this part, of course. It looks sort of like this, two nostrils, and then kind of a line between them. There's a bit of a raised area. Interestingly, there are other whales like sperm whales, which only have a single blowhole on one side. So they're missing the pair. But baleen whales typically have two. Okay, so of course they're air-breathing animals. They need that. And the next thing we're going to do is add the flukes. And flukes in many whales, especially humpback whales, are very important. They're very important for conservation, for monitoring their numbers, because they are like the equivalent of our fingerprints. They have markings on them, and the shape of the flukes are the tail, sort of the tail fins at the very end, that are diagnostic and unique to each individual animal. And so this is one of the most important parts of an animal for monitoring their numbers. They have actual field guides published for individual whales, photographs of their flukes, so that you can identify exactly which individual you're looking at if you happen to see one raise its flukes. Because they do that when they're diving. You can see the underside of their flukes, which is really a beautiful thing to be able to see. And so what we're going to do is draw this beautiful, wide, horizontal whale's tail, or flukes, coming off the rear end of the animal. And the back end of the flukes is kind of jagged. So when you draw that line at the back end, make it a little bit jagged. And again, this pattern is unique to each individual whale. Humpback whales live to maybe 50 or more years. And so these field guides to individual whales can be very useful for long periods of time to track their population trends and their distribution, and also what happens to individuals, because they can be indicators of various kinds of trauma that they will experience. So, for example, there is one whale that is known as Blade Runner. This is the nickname that's been given to this one. And the reason why Blade Runner is called Blade Runner is because when you look at the flukes, like in the lower left-hand corner here, you'll see Blade Runner has not just a particular pattern of white and black, but the edge of the right side, the right fluke, is actually scored by a series of regularly spaced cuts. This is due to a boat propeller. At some point, Blade Runner got hit by a vessel, and it was sliced by the propeller. And this is one of the big risks that humpback whales still do face today. Yes, they have rebounded from whaling, but impacts with ships and either just the bulk of the ship's hull itself or with the propeller pose a huge threat to them. The whales are very resilient, so Blade Runner continues to move along happily, but there are marks of this nasty event, and many whales unfortunately do not survive. And the number of animals that are found dead as a result of boat strikes is increasing these days. So one of the things we have to watch out with. Also, they get entangled in fishing gear, ghost nets, as they're known often, that are left to float, or active ones. And unfortunately, that can weigh them down. They use up too much energy to swim. They may drown. They may starve. They might get so tangled up that they actually drown on the spot. And so there are active programs for finding identifying and finding whales that are entangled in fishing gear, and there are groups that are organized specifically to go out and remove these. And so we should not be doing it ourselves. We report whales that are entangled, and then there are groups that go out specifically to disentangle them, because sometimes there's things that are underwater you can't see from above that remain attached to them. Okay, so the flukes of whales, of humpback whales especially, are super useful for identifying them. The next thing we're going to do is add the right flippers. The flippers are their equivalent of our arms. They're homologous, or evolutionarily, they're the same basic material as the front limbs of land animals. And so humpback whales have these amazingly gigantic flippers. Interestingly, they're closely related to fin whales, which is another one of the rorquals, but they look very different from fin whales. Fin whales, this is one of them that was, if you've read the book by Farley Mowat called A Whale for the Killing, it was a fin whale that was trapped in a harbor on the East Coast. That's the one that was that these are closest related to. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow closely the line that we draw initially in light, or for me in red. But in the front edge of these flippers, make sure you add a lot of these tubercles, like we added the bumps on the head. And there's a spectacular reason for this. A beautiful hypothesis. So what I'm going to do is going to make these big bumps on the front edge of it every once in a while. It's different from every whale. So, if this was really visible from the surface, flippers would also be a wonderful diagnostic feature to identify individual whales, but usually they're not as visible from the surface as are the flukes of the whale. And so, of course, it's the flukes that are used so much for these field guides to identify individuals. These front tubercles on the front edge are often also encrusted in barnacles. And as you may know, barnacles are actually related to, they're crustaceans, but they're sessile. They sit in place when they're adults, and they just filter things out of the water as well. They look like these little weird beaks that are attached to the surface of rocks, or whales in this case. And they're very sharp and very hard. So they are effectively not quite parasites on the whale, but they're commensals. They live on the whale, but they don't interfere with it. However, in this case, you might almost suggest that they're mutualists, because not only do they get a free ride from the whale and pass more water over so they can filter food out of it, but the whale gets benefit from them as well. When they're attached to these tubercles, the tubercles and barnacle combinations become weapons for the whale for defending themselves. Humpback whales are hunted by orcas, especially the young, but the adults also. And in fact, there's been a couple of cases where great white sharks have taken down an adult humpback whale when working as a pack. And these tubercles encrusted with barnacles and the massive fin are really effective at smashing against predators that are trying to attack the whale, and they're used that way. And so this is one of the functions of the tubercles encrusted with barnacles. The other is a really spectacular thing, and it has to do with how they feed. I'm going to add the left flipper, and then as I do, I'm going to talk about why this is such a neat thing. So I also add this diagram that I drew at the very bottom here, and it refers to one of their key feeding mechanism for which humpback whales are known. This is called bubble net feeding. What they do is they, as many of you might know already, they swim in circles in a tighter and tighter spiral below a massive swarm of krill or other plankton. And they create, and then they blow bubbles through their blowhole as they're going in the circle. As they do this, that creates a curtain of bubbles that surrounds the krill and forces them to get tighter into a ball. And what they then do is once their curtain is finished, they swim to the bottom, and then they swim up at high speed with their mouth open and lunge through this cloud of plankton and engulf gigantic amounts of it, and then filter them out through their baleen. And so here's an example of what it would look like at the surface of one of these humpback whales after it has opened its mouth wide, engulfed a bunch of krill, and is closing the mouth now to let the water filter out. One of the things you'll notice here is that there are these grooves on the throat as it's doing this massive feeding with this what's called gulp feeding. The throat actually expands. It's flexible. It's kind of elastic, and these throat grooves allow it to expand further. So we're going to draw the throat grooves in place on our whale, they're barely visible. There's about, what, 12 to 14 of them, I think, on whales, typically of this species. But what's interesting, let's change the size of my, there we go. What's interesting here is that, yeah, they're able to expand their throat really massively. And therefore, they can take in huge amounts of water. Now, I mentioned before about the tubercles on the flippers. And here's another really neat thing about them. It was found I don't remember who it was, but somebody did a study relatively recently about the effect of tubercles on the front edge of these flippers. And they used a humpback whale model specifically to investigate this. What ends up happening is that when the flipper moves through the water, these tubercles can channel water in more restricted way over the surface of the flipper. And it actually creates the equivalent of increased lift. And so the flipper becomes much more maneuverable and much more effective for the whale to change direction rapidly. And this is important when they're doing this bubble net feeding, to change direction rapidly when creating these tight curtains of bubbles and then changing direction rapidly and moving toward the surface through the curtain of bubbles. So their giant flippers are not only effective as means of protecting themselves, but also to increase their maneuverability in their feeding. And these tubercles are an effective part of that. Their hydrodynamic properties, what makes them capable of moving more effectively through the water, is really a key feature. So really need to understand why they're shaped the way they are. Okay, so we have most of the whale in place. The last thing that we're going to add here is the markings. So humpback whales have several different populations. And depending on where they are, there seem to be about 3 subspecies, and they have different markings. Mostly they're black. Sometimes there's white on the belly in the southern populations in the southern hemisphere. And then those ones also have very large or a small amount of white on the front edge of the flippers. The ones around the northern parts of the world in the northern hemisphere are more dark in color and have a large white flipper mostly. And so you can add, depending on which particular population you choose to make this, you can color it differently. I'm just going to add a bit of color to make it one of our northern ones. This is like the border of where the white and the black is. There white patches underneath it, below the dorsal fin. And then, of course, most of the flippers are white. And so we have these beautiful animals that are colored differently. A southern hemisphere one would look like the one that's breaching on the upper left here. And that's one of the things that they also do. This is a popular thing with humpback whales. They'll like lift themselves clear of the water and then just do this enormous like body slam on the water and creating this massive splash. So you kind of have to be careful, you know, if you're a boat nearby, you can get like big waves from them. Beautiful to see, though. And they do this maybe for play or maybe to remove parasites. It might be for communication. Now we have these beautiful animals that have recovered spectacularly well from the impacts of whaling. They're still facing some concerns, though, and specifically climate change related, as well, directly and indirectly. So one of the things that they face is that as the waters warm, the amount of sea ice on the at the poles decreases. This is super important because the bulk of their food is krill, and krill requires vast amounts of sea ice for its distribution to remain stable near the poles. So as we lose sea ice, this affects the distribution of krill, their main food source, throughout the summer months. And that can lead to the potential for whales to become malnourished or starve if they don't have proper access to the krill, or to change the distributions. Also, as waters warm and currents change in direction. Oh, sorry, yes?
I just popped something in the chat for you, Julius.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Let me just check here. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. Yeah. This is just going to be a couple more minutes. We're almost done there. Excellent. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Just making sure that we're in time with everybody else. So we're just about finished here, but as currents change, there's going to be a potential difference in how the whales can use that information for migration patterns. And so this could destabilize how they move. We have to be really careful also about the krill harvesting industry. There's a massive increased industry in harvesting krill for use by humans, but not for our eating, but to feed to fish in fish farms, because we're increasing the amount of fish that we consume from fish farms versus wild fish, because we're now cognizant of the effects of our fishing practices on stocks of wild fish. So we have to be careful because everything is connected. If we hunt krill to feed to fish in fish farms, we're now also influencing whales. So we really have to be aware that all of these effects interact with each other on a global scale, and we really have to carefully monitor our impact on the biosphere. With that, I would suggest that you, and I always do this, write letters to your political representatives or government representatives asking us to create responsible and effective legislation to protect humpback whales, other animals, entire ecosystems, because that's what they need. Sometimes what we can do is include drawings like this, maybe in letters, either in emails, scanned, or if it's a physical drawing in a letter. I'll bet you anything that seeing these kinds of drawings will catch their attention more than just seeing a letter of words alone. It might be helpful. Letter writing campaigns have been effective. With that, I'd really like to thank you for your attention. We've got a humpback whale drawing here, and I hope you very much enjoyed this. I certainly did. And thank you very much, everybody.